Welcome to the podcast for Healing Neurology, where we talk about everything that can help heal your neurology, which is really everything from food, lifestyle, and medicine to nature, culture, and politics. There's no topic too big or too small. I'm Jillian Ehrlich, family nurse practitioner, certified in Ayurveda and functional medicine. And we have here with us today, we are lucky enough to have Mr. David Feinberg. He's an engineer who's worked in everything from textiles to stone and metal. 10 years ago, while repairing other juicers, he learned from his customers about the importance of juicing for their health and medical conditions, but also their challenges with their existing options for juicers. So he realized the technology had not changed in 60 years, and he set out to create a better two-stage juicer. Every time I think of two-stage juicers, I think of the two-step dance, which I don't really know either. So I'm interested to hear more about that from you today. So today he has patented design that boasts high yields, 5,400 pounds of pressure for true cold pressed juice, and a community of happy customers who are embracing a lot of concepts that we here at Center for Healing Neurology embrace also. So eating fruits and vegetables for health, nutrition, well-being, eating closer to the sun, eating in season, organic, and things that help us keep hydrated and support our health for the long term. So welcome, David. We're so glad to have you.
Hi, Jillian. Thank you so much.
I'm excited. There's a lot of things that you know that I definitely do not know. I'm so glad you're here.
Well, I come to this as an engineer and a machine designer. So I come in from a different angle than you do, from a health angle. I know many people who started juicing did start from a health perspective, but we always started from how can we make the very best juicer that we possibly can. Some of the health stuff is new to me, even though I've been involved in this for 30 years.
That's so great. Tell us a little bit about your engineering background.
So I'm actually a self-taught engineer, and I have since before I was in high school been making things. So I started off as a designer in the outdoor equipment industry. I used to design for Sierra Designs and the North Face and all of those companies making expedition clothing and climbing equipment and tents and backpacks. And over the years, that transitioned into learning how to draw in 3D CAD, which transitioned into making things out of metal, which transitioned into precision equipment, lathes and milling equipment, and how do you actually make things that work. And then that finally led me to juicers.
Let's get this straight. If you're a guy who's designed and developed climbing equipment to hang off, say, El Cap, maybe a 3,000-foot wall, then we can probably trust the quality of your juicers.
I think as with all of us, we probably start and we look back on the work we did in our youth and we know we were well-intentioned and then we laugh at the quality of what we did. But then we come today and we see just how obsessive and careful and hardworking we are and how good we are at what we do. After a lifetime, yes, I think everything works out really quite well.
Good. Well, that is so interesting. What a wild background. It reminds me a lot of my Outward Bound days. I taught outdoor education for about 7 years and was using all that climbing equipment and expedition equipment and sailed from Hawaii to San Diego on a 47-foot ketch, which is a 2-masted boat. We needed all that equipment. And so it's great to see how you've transitioned into this other aspect of health. It's healthy to be outside and be playing, and it's healthy to be pulling out all these micronutrients from these vegetables and fruits that we need so dearly. So let's hear the story about how you first got involved with juicers.
Actually, I got involved in juicers probably in 1978. I bought my first Acme centrifugal juicer. Yeah. And at the time I was taking Tai Chi at a dojo in Manhattan at Canal and Mott Street. And my Tai Chi instructor had this very unusual looking machine, which if you looked at it, you wouldn't know what it is. And they said, that's a juicer. It was a 2-stage juicer, and this was 1978. And I would look at it and go, how does that make juice? And I could never figure it out. And now here we are making the world's best 2-stage juicer, 40 years later or something.
And you started out repairing juicers, is that right?
Right. So what happened was I'd been an outdoor equipment designer for forever, really since high school. And I transitioned out of a corporate job as the director of design at what has since become a very large company. And I was looking around for things to do, and I was buying and selling lathes and milling equipment, which all weigh at least 12 or 1,500 pounds, and hauling them around on trailers and fixing them. And at the same time, I had a 2-stage juicer, and I Actually I was raising money. So I sold the two-stage juicer I had that I bought years ago. And I discovered that there was an enormous market on them used on eBay, and that it was really a unfilled demand. And so I started buying and selling and repairing two-stage juicers. So I personally have rebuilt probably 500 two-stage juicers,
Wow.
Made by other companies. And in the course of doing this, we made a bucket list of everything that could be improved. And we started the company.
Was there something that typically went wrong? Was it a number of different things that went wrong with different juicers?
There was one thing that kept coming up over and over again, and that is known for a thing called blowback. And that is you put a carrot and then you spray your entire ceiling with carrot. And I think of my dear friend Peggy Strauss, who's Charlotte Gerson's daughter, and who's now in her 70s. And she said, I've grown up with this machine and it hasn't changed since I was a kid. It's got the same flaws now that it did then. And those are some pretty inspirational words to, take this to the next level. So anyway, this was the thing that this machine is known for. And I would say, who would buy a refrigerator that periodically defrosted all your food? Anyway, so we felt like we could do better. And there were a lot of other little things too. But that was the starting point.
You definitely had a lot of experience with other juicers before you started yours. And when you started Pure Juicer, what were the things that you wanted to make sure happened in your juicer?
Well, what we wanted to do, we had this list of everything that was wrong or that could be improved. And we had an industry that has been static for 60 years. And it turned out that it wasn't just improving one thing, but that the entire state of the art could be looked at and re-envisioned. So, we got to look at everything. We got to look at blowback. We got to look at wing nuts that were attaching the feed tube and make a patented mechanism for attaching it. We got to look at the cutter that was being made from a mild 304 stainless steel and make it out of a hardened, stainless steel that rarely needs sharpening. We could look at the geometry of the machine and make it so that the press chamber was larger and you could put more in. We could change the performance parameters of the machine so that instead of pressing at 3,500 to 4,000 pounds, we could reliably push at 5,400 pounds, which turns out to give you, as you would imagine, more juice, more nutrient-dense juice, better every juice that is capable of freezing and thawing and retaining 90% of its enzymes. We looked at everything and, we made improvements everywhere.
And can you talk about what is a two-stage juicer? What does that mean? What are the two stages?
It's just like we make apple cider. Probably many of us have been to apple cider pressing parties where you've got a machine and one part of the machine is grinding a pulp, and then you fold the whole thing and you put it in a press and you squeeze it. And this is what the big commercial machines that commercial companies use. They're using this thousands of year old process. You grind it and you press it. It's a lot like making virgin olive oil, actually. Two-stage juicing is you grind the mash and then you press a mash.
And so what were some of the new things that you did with the Pure Juicer? Like what makes the grind differ or what makes the press different? I will say that even more than comparing to a different juicer, I will tell you that I don't know a ton about juicers, about the machinery at all. And I'll tell you that in my background of recommending juice to patients, I used to always just say, go on Craigslist. There's always a million juicers for $40 because they're big. And I think people go on health kicks and buy them and then they don't use them and they're big and they're on the counter. And so that it's easy to pick up a juicer, any old juicer. So I am actually interested in what are the engineering aspects, not as compared to other juicers necessarily, but I am interested in, we talked about oxidation, we talked about yield, in the list of notes is oxidation, yield, and ease of use. So separate from any other juicer, just how does juicing and how does the Pure Juicer pull nutrients out?
So there are a lot of ways to make juice. There's really three primary juicing machines. There's a centrifugal juicer, there's a masticating juicer, and then there's a two-stage cold press juicer. So with a centrifugal juicer, you're pushing vegetables in and you're oxidizing everything that's going in because it runs against a grinder and then it's flung through the air and pressed up against the walls of a basket and the juice is centrifugally extracted.
And so what oxidizes the juice there is the heat of the grinder, or is it the oxygen of the being tossed?
Absolutely both, because it's cutting via friction and then being flung through the air to get oxygenated. Imagine you have a cutter on the bottom of a basket, and the basket is spinning and you're grinding with friction, which is heating it up, flinging it through the air to oxidize it, and then you're extracting the juice centrifugally. So what you get is this juice that lasts for about 20 minutes. You get a relatively low yield. With greens, you get almost no yield because it's a terrible way to extract greens. So that's centrifugal juicing. And masticating juicing is actually quite a bit better and is a very good way to make green juice. And what limits masticating juicers is the size of the infeed. So you cannot grind an awful lot at once because the infeed is about 1.25 inches. So they require a lot of chopping. Most of them have a lot of plastic parts, so your food is in contact with a lot of plastic. And then the juice is expressed through an auger, a lot like your KitchenAid, where it's being wound down a screw against a perforated screen and pressure is created. And then the juice is extracted by pushing it through a series of smaller and smaller perforations.
You're panning for gold.
You're panning for gold. And they make decent juice at lower yield than a pure, although they're very fast at making a cup of green juice. I will not knock them for a green juice. But if you want to do what we call big batch juicing, they're not really great for big batch juicing, but they are great for making a glass of juice. Downsides are lots of plastic parts and lots of parts to clean, and in some cases, difficult to clean.
Okay.
That's a masticating juicer. Then you get to what we're making, where all of the food contact parts are made from stainless steel, which is all lab tested and all confirmed to be, genuine stainless steel with no contaminants. And all of the parts are big. They rinse easily. Our infeed tube is 54 millimeters, so that's a little over 2 inches. And you barely have to chop anything up to run it through the grinder. The grinder does not oxidize at all because it's cutting so quickly. Even though it cuts fast, it's cutting, I'm going to back up. So even though our motor RPM is quite high, the amount of time that the material is in contact with the blade is so short that no heating or oxidation occurs. So the produce is ground, it falls through into a collection bowl. You transfer from a collection bowl onto a press cloth. You fold 1.25 cups to 1.5 cups of pulp into a press cloth, transfer it into the hydraulic press, and then squeeze it at 5,400 pounds until the pulp is bone dry and like cardboard. What we find and what lab testing has confirmed is the more complete the extraction, the better the juice. Go ahead.
In what way?
Well, you have no oxidation, you have longer shelf life, you have higher nutrient counts, higher mineral counts, higher enzyme counts, and more phytonutrients in every way. And this is really getting to the point of it. Yes, this is an expensive machine, but if you want the very best, and if you're committed to your health, why have health insurance? Why not just buy a juicer? And I'm in no way advocating that somebody should not have health insurance. But the point is that these are an investment in health, and they're also a great way to produce a tremendous amount of juice food so that, as you would say, you're eating close to the sun and you're able to consume, you can juice 20 pounds of something in an hour and turn that into anywhere from 10 to 15 pounds of juice, which would be 5 to 7 quarts of juice. So you can make up to 1.75 gallons an hour of juice that is readily digestible and quick to make. So why wouldn't you make some of the best food that you possibly could easily? And you can't do that on any other kind of juicer.
We spend a lot of money on ourselves, things that we think are going to make us happy, we think are going to keep us healthy, on gym memberships, on even buying coffee as opposed to making it at home. There's lots of ways that we spend money on ourselves. So I think this two-step juicer is essentially something that you would invest in for lifelong, that would last a long time. And there's a few things that you mentioned that I just wanted to call out. One of the complaints that I've always had about juicing is that you get so much pulp and then there's nothing you can do with it. So you actually are throwing away a lot of the food. And with the pure juicer, you're actually going to keep more of those nutrients. You're going to get more out of it. So you're wasting less. The second piece is that it's going to be able to last longer. And that's kind of amazing what you said about being able to freeze it and unfreeze it. So one of the things that we know about juice and food in general, especially for mast cell activation syndrome, the longer food sits, and the more it slowly ferments and the more histamines it produces. So this way you actually can make more juice that will actually last longer with less fermentation, less natural breakdown, and the ability to freeze it. And you're able to make more volume in a shorter amount of time. And then the last thing that we had talked about was ease of cleaning, because your machine, that's a super common complaint about juicers. But what makes your juicer so easy to clean?
Well, all the parts are big and stainless steel. And they're also dishwasher safe. So you can, personally, I just rinse all my parts in cold water, flush them out, and a little soap and water, and everything is clean. And there are no tiny perforated screens to clean. Everything is really quite simple.
Yeah.
So to clean, it's big and few parts. We have, I think, 5 parts that can go in the dishwasher or in the sink for easy rinsing. And let me go back to something that at the beginning, you were talking about the filter cloth. And I think I want to speak to that. You were talking about pulp in the juice and then the remainder pulp. And I think this is actually a really important topic. So as an engineer, I look at the total moisture content that's available in any vegetable, and you can look them up on the FDA website. So the closer that we can come to the moisture content of the actual produce, the more efficient we are. And so with a 2-stage juicer, with a pure juicer, you're going to get, for instance, I can get up to 88% juice from celery. So if 1,000 grams of celery, I can make up to 880 milliliters of juice. And I've got to be coming pretty close to the moisture content of the celery at that point. This is really where it's like revolutionary, is that we can get really close to the total moisture content of what we are squeezing, what we are juicing. That's great. Yeah. So part of my background is in industrial textiles. I have personally purchased literally millions of yards and sent them out for lab testing at my last job, where we designed boat covers and RV covers and all kinds of cover products. Long story short, I identified a company that we work with on our filter material. And every time we do a run of filter fabric, we get a lab test on it and we see how strong it is, how porous it is. We get all the performance characteristics. And I've gradually been improving our filter cloth, and now the pulp sticks very little to the filter cloth. It's incredibly porous, and it's also very, very strong. So we've been able to make a huge inroad into the pressing cloth that is used in 2-stage juicing. So back to the pulp. So the pulp that comes out, people always say, well, what can you do with the pulp? And the entire point of 2-stage juicing is to remove the pulp. We're not trying to do anything with the pulp except remove it and compost it. The beauty of 2-stage juicing is that the pulp comes out in such a spent state, you literally don't want to eat it. It tastes like cardboard. And so, you have gotten all the juice out of it. There's nothing left from your expensive produce. So toss it, put it in the worm bin.
And worm bins, I will say, I had a stage in my life where I worked on a worm farm down south of Olympia. And so I highly recommend, and that was when I was, I think, 19 years old in the early 90s. And we actually had a contract with Odwalla because they were bringing us a lot of their juice pulp, and they were trying to figure out if they could worm bin it. So worm binning is an excellent way. It's a good thing to do to build your own compost. So this is my little plug for worm bins. And it's great for kids to watch things break down. And pulp and coffee grounds are pretty much fruit and vegetable pulp, juice pulp, and coffee grounds are pretty much one of worms' favorite thing. It's already half broken down, so it doesn't spend a lot of time smelling. It just becomes soil quickly.
Funny you should mention Odwalla. A friend of mine moved to Santa Cruz to play music with these jazz musicians. And these jazz musicians had started a little juice company to pay for their jazz habit. I remember being on the coast in California in Davenport and walking through the Odwalla factory, looking at their machinery. And this was before I was an engineer, wondering, how did they make this stuff?
I was really interested in wilderness in environmental science. I wanted to be an environmental scientist and came out to Evergreen. The only program that they had that was still open was called Ecological Agriculture. And this was in the fall of 1993. Kurt Cobain was still alive. And I thought, well, I'll do this environmental agriculture program. I really hope that they don't talk about farming too much because farming seemed pretty boring. I was pretty excited about wilderness, and I was interested in being outside and camping and skiing and climbing and hiking. And I will tell you that when I first came out to Evergreen and I went to the farmhouse on the first day of class and everybody was talking about organic foods, and I thought, okay, organic means it has a carbon molecule in it, and all food except maybe salt has a carbon molecule. So what is organic? What's non-organic food? What would organic versus non-organic be? Because that would just be all the food versus basically salt. I was very confused. I was very embarrassed. So I tried to pretend like I knew what everybody was talking about, but I soon learned about organic food is conventionally known as non-conventionally grown food. So organic being without herbicides, pesticides, other chemicals, and with organic matter being fed back, like worm castings, fed back into the soil. And so there I was, little baby farmer, learning about all this, and subsequently worked on a community-supported agriculture farm in Southwest Ohio for a season. It was a big learning for me about how our food is produced. We like it when our food has prana, has that energy, and is produced most close to the sun, and that really is plants. We talked about this on our last podcast, actually, with Stefan Weitz from Jetson Health and talking about probiotics. But we talked about the idea that even chickens process food and feed through their bodies to make eggs, but juice coming from plants are really hold the most prana. They're the most close to the sun. And so you really are feeding yourself much more than just the nutrient. You know, this is not the Jetsons, not Jetson Health, but the TV show, The Jetsons, where you just push a button and out comes a little peg of food, a little pellet. We're not there yet, as much as the protein bar companies might want us to think that. So we do really want to eat all these nutrients. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how you think about recipes. If we could just kind of talk about recipes a little bit. How do you make your recipes? What kind of recipes do you like?
You know, I have to say I'm kind of a boring juicer. I make a lot of the same things over and over again. And then when Jen or somebody else has something really great, I try it. But, you know, my go-to juice is like carrot apple. And then I love adding lime and jalapeno. We are on a total orange juice kick here at Pure Juicer. I just I buy so many oranges and make so much orange juice. But the way I look at it is I think the recipes are formulas, and the recipes are formulas for health. And that it is pretty well documented that there are certain things in certain vegetables that will have certain results, and that if you mix them up, you can address health issues.
Yep, absolutely. And you're exactly right. And that's a great quote. Recipes are formulas for health, because these are protocols just the same as pharmaceuticals, over-the-counter, drugstore. These are things that are going to physiologically impact your metabolism and physiologically impact your body, your mind, everything, your awareness. In the process of putting together a juicing for your neurology book. And so one of the ways that I think about juicing and juice recipes, because I think it can be hard to figure out where to start. So getting a juicer, certainly if you're going to juice, you know, there are those hand pressers for lemon and lime. So that's kind of the old home way of doing it. You can certainly get out a mortar and pestle and pull out some juice, but I think that'll get tiring really quickly. So if you start with a juicer.
So ask me what the best juicer is.
What's the best juicer?
The one you use. It really is. You know, we don't care what juicer you get, just juice.
Yep,
and I go back to what you say. The best juicer is the one you use.
That's very true. So starting with figuring out how you're going to juice, how you're going to extract your juice out of your fruits and vegetables is number one. Finding a source for your fruits and vegetables. So just to put another plug in for community-supported agriculture, for local, for organic, for seasonal, that's one way to start with a guide for what to juice. Is what's local and what's up, what the earth is handing us right now in the place we live.
And then another very important thing is making it part of your routine. So where people fail in juicing is that they don't establish it as part of their routine, and that what we're really trying to get people to do is to integrate it so that they do it when they do everything else in their day. Like, for instance, Jen tells me she juices every other day because it just doesn't fit her routine to juice every day. So Jen makes 1 gallon of juice for her family, 144 ounces, and that's enough for the 3 of them for 2 days. So then she repeats that every 2 days, and that's her juicing routine. And so in that period of time, 144 ounces probably came from 200 ounces of produce. So imagine, 3 people eating 200 ounces of produce in 2 days. If you're drinking it, it's no problem.
And that goes back to the next piece of why we want juicing so badly, is because the micronutrient content that you can extract out of juice, you would have to eat. It would be too much food to eat. And there's lots of debate about fiber. We know fiber is good, so is losing all this fiber okay? And we want to say that juicing is part of a larger diet. It's not just juice. And that what you get out of juicing specifically is the micronutrients as well as the enzymes, and that it's very, very easy to digest juice, which is why we're not what we eat, we are what we digest. So if you're eating more food, but it's too complex on your system and your system has to produce too many enzymes and it's not getting broken down well, then from the Ayurvedic perspective, it can produce what's called ama, which you can see as a coating on the tongue or pain in the joints or cloudy mind or fatigue or just feeling kind of run down and tired and achy. And so you're not getting the benefits out of your micronutrients if they're being bogged down in the digestive process in your body. So for anybody whose digestion is not top notch, which is all of us at some point or another, then adding juice as part of the routine means that you can ensure you're getting those micronutrients across that. You talk about all of your textiles and your textile history and getting it across the fiber cloth to pull out the pulp. That's kind of what our gut lining is doing, right? It's sort of like a textile that you have to get these nutrients across. And so there's lots of things that play into how well we do that process. So having an easier substrate to start with is going to mean that we're going to get more into our system ultimately.
That's a great analogy. And I want to touch on one piece that you mentioned, which is fiber. And, one of the chief objections I hear about juice is, well, you're taking all the fiber out and you need fiber. And I'll say two things. One, there's a ton of soluble fiber in juice, but also more importantly, if you're eating well, then you are getting a lot of fiber. You're getting it from your oatmeal. You're getting it from the fresh fruits and vegetables that you do eat, and that you don't need to get your fiber from your juice. What you want to get from your juice is what you were just describing, this easily digestible form of nutrients. The fiber that we eat, we can get from many, many sources. And if we're eating well, it's not hard to get.
One way that I think about recipes is about base vegetables or fruits, how we combine bases, and then how I think of juicing as having condiments. And so base nutrients are kind of like the big bulk vegetables that you're getting. So this is going to be your apple, your carrot, your celery, your cabbage, your zucchini, all the different kinds of fruits, grapes, kale, spinach, arugula, all of the greens, all of those big ticket items. Well, not big ticket in terms of money, but in terms of large size items, lemons, limes. And then I think about adding the condiments. And condiments, I think of things that impact how they digest in our system and the smaller nutrients. So I would add cilantro, parsley, ginger, jalapeno, spirulina, barley grass, all of these smaller components that change the formulation. And so you can kind of do a mixing and matching based on the season and based on what you're looking for.
Well, I do know people who do that. And in fact, I certainly know juice bars that think of juicing that way, because they're juicing out all their main things and then they're adding what they call toppers. And what I was inspired to think of as you were talking is that all of those things that you listed, you could make as an juice individually and then freeze in ice cube trays. So
yes,
if you wanted to do big batches of cilantro and ginger and turmeric or any of those kinds of things, you could do a big batch, pour them off into ice cube trays, freeze them. And then when you made, the bulk stuff, then you could just add your ice cubes to it and have your toppers. And
yes,
science that we've seen says that 90% of the enzymes are retained after
That's
a month.
amazing.
That's part of what I'm always trying to think. I'm always trying to think of ways to make juicing easier, to make juicing more efficient. So we've got this machine, but it's not obvious, how to use it and how to run it or how to get the most out of it. And so, especially as our community gets bigger, like some of my community are people who are been juicing forever, and, maybe they've frankly lost their teeth, and the only way that they can eat food is to eat liquid food. Or at another end of the spectrum, I have a customer and he juices twice a month. And he freezes all the juice. He makes like 7 gallons of juice twice a month. And he only makes one recipe. which he calls blood of the earth. And it's got like 27 ingredients. He's perfected the recipe, and he just big batch juices twice a month. And then I see all the people who are coming into it who have never experienced this kind of juicing before, and they're not engineers and they're not scientists. They're just people who want to live well. And so we need to create all of this content essentially to show them, how do you get the most out of the machine? It's a big machine. It can be a little bit intimidating when you first get it. Then you learn how to use it. You learn not to be afraid of it. You learn how powerful it is and what you can do with it. And then I'm trying to make videos of, oh, look, if you slice this way instead of that way, you can increase your yield 10%. If you do it like this, you can be faster. Oh, you have a very wet pulp. Well, let's run it through a strainer so that when you're folding it up, it's not a wet mess, but it's a nice compact bit of pulp. So now the thing that we're doing more and more is getting the information out there, because there's a whole field of knowledge around how to do this. And we're trying to get better. We're learning from our customers what they want. And we're trying to show people how to juice as efficiently as they can. Ice cubes, strainers. Yep. You want these containers, if you slice your oranges this way instead of that way. And, because I juice all the time, I think of it as an engineer, and not everybody does. So I need to impart what I've learned as I'm thinking about it all the time.
So what's the right way to slice an orange?
The right way to slice an orange is when first I peel an orange and then I cut it in both directions. I cut it in half and then I slice it in both directions, but not all the way through. So it's a series of half-inch squares, because what's really important is not how you slice it, but the distance that the juice needs to travel to escape from the matrix that it's in. So some of the produce that we squeeze whole. We squeeze pineapples whole. We squeeze oranges whole. We squeeze lemons and limes whole. And so the distance from the inside to the outside matters. So by adding slices, you're reducing the distance the juice has to travel to escape from the produce.
So how do you do that with pineapples?
So with pineapples, I slice every pineapple probably into about 4 major slices. And then on one side of it, I make one series of cuts in one direction. And then I flip it over and I make another series of cuts at 90 degrees to it. And then I put it.
Oh, you do have an engineer's mind.
I tried measuring it this way and that way. And I'm like, oh, look, we got a better yield when we did it this way.
And so what do you recommend peeling versus not peeling? Like ginger or turmeric or...
Well, the rule with vitamins is that if it's a different color than the skin, it's got a vitamin concentration in the skin. And if it's the same color as the skin, it's a little denser, but not significantly denser. So things with different color skins, it's really important to juice those, because that's where a lot of the nutrients are.
And can you give some examples? So like for something like...
Apples would be a prime example.
So apples you would keep, but oranges you would pull off.
I remove the outer skin, but not the pith. The pith is so important. There's so much good stuff in the pith. But I peel the orange part because the aromatic oils can make the juice bitter. And that from certain modalities say that you don't want to have these aromatic oils.
What about like seeds, like apple or watermelon?
I am a believer in seeds. Seeds are the basis of life. So whatever's in that seed you want. That's me.
What other things can you tell us about other fruits or vegetables that are, like, do you leave the ginger skin on or do you peel that off?
I do leave the ginger skin on. I mean, if you're buying organic, I think you can rinse and leave the skin on. If you're buying inorganic, if you're buying conventional, which is not recommended, but I'm sure lots of people do it, I'd recommend peeling.
And what about like kale spines or some of those tougher pieces of like the center of the cabbage or the stalk of the broccoli?
Well, okay, so like for me, a key way of how I juice is if you have something leafy like lettuce or kale, I break it and fold it in half, and then I'm pushing it into the feed tube. And so I view the stalk as reinforcement material to help me put everything in. Plus, I'm just a believer in using everything. If we have this expensive produce, we should get the most out of all of it.
What about like the tops of the carrots or this?
I tip and tail carrots. I definitely tip and tail carrots. I've certainly seen lots of juice bars do the whole carrot, and every time I'm creeped out.
What about watermelon?
I wouldn't do the skin on watermelon, but I would do everything else, and I would just press it. I would cut it up so that I could just press it. So once again, it's like certain things come up, but I haven't done them. It's like, I've squeezed watermelon, but I keep thinking about watermelon and thinking, well, I should take the watermelon and I should squeeze the red part, but the white part and the skin, I should grind that up and press that separately because there's got to be a whole bunch of good stuff right there. But I haven't done that yet.
And when you say press, do you mean that you're not using the 2 steps for watermelon? You're just using it as 1 step?
Right. So there's a whole bunch of things we've discovered you can just squeeze. Lemons, limes, or basically citrus you can just squeeze without grinding. And watermelon, I would just squeeze without grinding. I wouldn't turn it into a giant wet mass. And if I did grind it, I would grind it and then I would run it through a strainer because it would be so wet, it would be impossible to just press the pulp. And you'd have this like soupy mess that you were trying to put in a press cloth. So if you run it through a strainer and then you shake the strainer, then it makes a nice consolidated mass and then I'd press it. But there's really no reason to get the left side of the machine dirty. So some things release their nutrients easily and directly. Like watermelon, you're not going to get a huge benefit by grinding it. You're going to be able to get the good stuff out of the watermelon just by pressing it. And I think that's also largely true for citrus.
And what about berries, like raspberries, blueberries?
Juicing berries is actually kind of tricky because a lot of it wants to get stuck in the press cloth and it tends to clog the press cloth because it makes this very liquid stuff. Mm-hmm. Raspberries are something that you can easily do. So they're a really good berry to juice.
Raspberries, black, and I would assume blackberries too.
Yeah, soft fruit like that. If you use a liner, then it works out really, really well. You can juice everything that way with a liner. I guess I just always laugh and I'm like, why wouldn't you just eat all the stuff you possibly can? And back to watermelon, absolutely. When you make it, squeeze the red part and grind the rind. That is absolutely the way to do watermelon because you'll get so much more out of that white pith surrounding the red flesh.
What are some other foods that we can think of that have kind of juicing foibles to them?
Oh, spinach. Spinach is like the most difficult thing to juice you've ever juiced because it creates this incredibly slippery stuff that wants to do the Indian rope trick with your press cloth and unfold and spray all over your kitchen. It's taken and so now anything that's really slippery, like for instance, if you were to grind oranges up, it would make the most slick pulp you've ever seen that's really hard to contain in a press cloth. So whenever I do that, I use a press bag because press bags only expand on one axis, not on 2 axes like the press cloth does. And you can control it. But so spinach is just really, really hard to press. You have to press it really slowly and really carefully so that the whole thing doesn't unravel and spray everywhere.
And what is a press bag versus a press cloth? What is a press bag?
So it's just a sewn bag with a closed end in it. And so I love the press bags for doing small citrus. I'll just cut my small citrus in half. I'll do my 2-way cut that I was describing earlier for citrus. And then I just squeeze it. And with lemons and limes, it's really interesting. When you get them out, the only thing that's left is the skin. It appears that the white pith has also been juiced in the course of just being squeezed. I have found the press bags to be really good for small citrus. And then there's a group of people who like juicing an entire recipe into the press bag and then they just squeeze it. Like there's a couple of juice trucks that I know that instead of making a mash and then putting it in a cloth, they just take the press bag, hang it on the machine, and juice the recipe straight into it, and then make 1 glass of the recipe. It's another tool. Everything's a tool, right?
So what about things like, and I'm just trying to think of other vegetables to kind of talk about, like what about potatoes? Can you do anything with potatoes?
I'm not a potato expert, but I can tell you jicama adds an incredible sweet flavor to juice, and you should try juicing jicama.
What about peppers, bell peppers of all colors?
High in silicon, you can't beat. It's an incredible source for silicon.
And what about like rhubarb?
Yes, absolutely. Probably want to add something sweet to rhubarb. We were eating rhubarb. Do you know what a miracle berry is? So miracle berries are these things that if you eat them, you can't taste sour. So 3 nights ago, Sarah brings home some miracle berries, and we all eat
Uh-huh.
our miracle berries. And then she's bringing out lemons, limes, rhubarb, and we're like, yeah, it tastes pretty good. Couldn't taste any of the sour because we'd all just eat these miracle berries.
And so what resources do you have from Pure for folks to ask for you guys to answer these questions?
So we have a YouTube channel that, we're continuously adding new content on that's showing different things. We're about to actually do a series of sort of juicing 101 videos to help people get up to speed with the machine. How do you clean it? How do you do this? What's the best way to run the press? And we actually want to break it down into a whole bunch of really short little sections instead of lengthy videos. We're working on writing blog content. So we are building our knowledge base right now.
That's great. And really building the community, because I think we do this together. We rise or fall together. I say it every time I outro this podcast, so using our combined knowledge is really what's going to get us furthest.
Oh, and it's just like the Heisenberg uncertainty principle. You can know where you are, how fast you're going, but not both. And the people who are in our community who ask us questions change who we are. I have an old customer in Kentucky, and she's been juicing for 40 years. And years ago, she bought, when I was selling the competitor machine from me, and she used it until she wore it out. And she's like, David, it's not working, and my neighbor can't fix it, and he's a cranky old man. Can I send it to you? And I'm like, yes, Sandy, send me your machine. And she sent in the machine, and my customer service person, Chandra, said to me, David, you know what you should do? And I'm like, no, what should I do? She said, send her a Pure back. And I'm like, oh my God, that is such an incredibly good idea. And Sandy's got no money, and she it's the only way she gets food, and she juices for herself and her daughter. And she was just like, I can't believe you did that, we get to have the company and we get to do things like that. And, I didn't really, I think I found a lot of humanity, late in life, through experiences like this.
I agree. It's part of what we do here at Center for Healing Neurology.
Like all the people who we work with, I love all the vendors and all the people in our supply chain, and as many customers as I can get to know, I like to make contacts with.
That's great.
And as soon as you do, it's like, it changes everything. You feel like you belong on a planet together.
I don't want to let you go today without talking about our other friends that we do belong on the planet with who are really struggling right now. The wee folk, who you have a special connection with. And I want to hear a little bit about your love for bees. Tell us about bees.
So my love for bees started with my wife, who is all things biological and is actually the animal care manager at the Pacific Science Center. One day, like 20 years ago, she brought home a beehive, and I was like, sure, whatever you want. And then what happened was really interesting. Sarah wasn't interested in the beehive, even though she's like ants are her thing. Eusocial animals are completely her thing. She's like the queen mole rat. She's got a colony of the most successful mole rats in the country at the Pacific Science Center. Mole rats are eusocial mammals. So where we get to bees, eusocial animals are any animal with a queen. And so there are even mammals that are eusocial, not just insects that are eusocial. So all the bees and wasps and Hymenoptera are eusocial. Anyway, so she brought this bee colony home, and I got interested in it. And then, I kind of was a bad beekeeper for many years. Every year I'd get my package of bees. Every winter they would die. And, some years I'd get honey, some years I wouldn't. And I finally got really interested in just the mechanics of beehives. And so then I bought 3 colonies so that I could see. And that was really eye-opening. When you have more than one bee colony, you start noticing the differences between colonies. And when you see different vigor and different patterns, you realize that's really, they start teaching you. You can't really learn until you see multiple colonies performing, and you can compare queens and you can compare colonies because they've got exactly the same environment, that your yard and the surrounding 1,250 feet to your house, and yet one might flourish and the other might die. And why is that? And so that got me really interested. And then it kind of got crazy. There was one year where I think I ran actually 80 colonies of bees down in Kent on an organic farm at my house. I had another apiary, near my house. I had a third apiary. I had bees everywhere. But these days, I got this very busy business. Right now, I came into the spring with 3 colonies, but because I'm David and bees happen, I have 9 colonies right now. It's just what happens. And we're coming into the Seattle blackberry season, which is our major nectar flow that we get so very exciting.
What are the yellow flowers that are invasive around here?
Our 3 major crops are maple, Himalayan blackberry, and knotweed. So 2 out of 3 of our best honey crops are invasive weeds.
And what are your thoughts? I, of course, because of the news, have to ask what your thoughts are about the murder hornets.
I am dying to see one because that is one of the most beautiful insects I've ever seen. And the giant Asian hornet, I hate that it's named the same way that I hate that orca whales are killer whales.
Yeah.
It is the giant Asian hornet. I hope we find and eradicate all of them very quickly because it's actually pretty terrifying. So I'm less concerned for the bees, although they would change beekeeping completely in the Northwest. Because imagine if all of a sudden in your backyard, 15 or 20 giant Asian hornets showed up to, destroy one of your colonies, you would be at risk because like 50 stings from those things are where lethality happens. And so right now, there are so many beekeepers in Seattle that we actually have a yellow jacket problem. Like I have been theorizing for years that there are so many beekeepers in West Seattle that eventually we're going to be able to overwinter yellow jackets because they'll be feeding on the larvae of the bees all winter instead of there not being a food supply and them dying. And I am ashamed to say I overwintered a yellow jacket colony this year on my bees. So as we get climate change, as the temperatures rise, as it becomes easier for yellow jackets to survive in the winter, we are now overwintering yellow jackets. This is not a good thing. And the idea of having giant Asian hornets flying around, I hope they find every nest and they nuke them into the Stone Age.
Well, let's think of one nice, sweet thing to talk about before we sign off here today.
This whole conversation has made me want juice so badly. And as soon as we get off the phone, I'm going out to the juicer and making a really big glass of water. If you drink juice, at some point you start to crave juice. And I crave juice and it's what I want. And it's what I want to eat. If I eat solid food, I can feel too heavy. I can feel unwell. But it's like if I drink juice, it elevates my mood and I feel great and be happy. So I'm going to leave here and make some juice.
And can you remind me what your website is?
We are www.purejuicer.com, PureJuicer.com.
Thank you so much, everybody, for listening today with David Feinberg from Pure Juicer, which you can find more about him, www.purejuicer.com, and on his YouTube channel for lots of details and instructions. And we can continue this conversation in many ways, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter for both Center for Healing Neurology as well as Pure Juicer. You can also get more information from and about us on our website, centerforhealingneurology.com, or even better, come see us in person at our Seattle-based clinic. Be sure to share this show with your friends. We welcome your rating and review wherever you get your podcasts, and feel free to send topic requests to podcast@centerforhealingneurology.com. We love that you've joined us today to discuss how to make our whole world medicine. We rise or fall together, which we talked about in the show today, and we are committed to doing what we can to make as many of us as healthy as possible. And this takes all of us, including you. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time.
Fish Media.
Partyfish Media acknowledges that it operates and records on indigenous Duwamish and Puget Sound Coast Salish land that is still home to the Duwamish tribe. This land is stolen in violation of the Point Elliott Treaty of 1855. We are committed to uplifting the name of these lands and community members from these nations who reside alongside us. For more information on this land, its people, or ways you can help, visit duwamishtribe.org or realrentduwamish.org.